Welcome back to the Beer Craft. I'm Ben, and with me as always is Andrew. Another episode of the Beer Craft coming right your way. Hey, Beer Crafters, in today's episode, we're going to deep dive into the incredible world of yeast. Have you ever wondered what makes a crisp lager different from a bold ale? What those little yeasts are up to while they're hard at work in your fermenter?
Well, you're in the right place. Stick around because we're breaking down ale versus lager yeast and uncovering the fascinating lifestyle of yeast that makes all the difference in your brew.
But before we do any of that, we've got to pause production because there's some very important critical information we have to do because it's Wednesday. It's that moment, that time, that place where we crack open a cold one and talk about it right here on
Beer 30.
In the craft beer system, the people are served by two but equally important groups: the brewers who make the beer and the bartenders who serve the pints. These are their stories, presented by Northwest Brewers Supply. You're handed a dusty bottle by a brewer with a tale as unique as the brew it holds. You never knew the challenges one man could face packaging his creation on a tailgate of a well-used Mazda pickup. Then you realize what awaits you at the bottom of the bottle is the essence of a man's journey. All started at Northwest Brewers Supply.
Welcome back to the Beer Craft. It is Beer 30 on a Wednesday night.
Yes,
and that means we're popping tops and busting tabs. Andrew, I see you've got a couple of different beers with us today.
I do.
What'd you bring?
Well, we're going to start out with Hefeweizen beer.
Hefeweizen beer.
Hefeweizen. It's Bavarian style. It is from Weihenstephaner.
Weihenstephaner.
Yep. The world's oldest brewery.
Just ask him.
And it is, according to a statement you have made, which violated Reinheitsgebot, this bottle states, brewed under the purity law of 1516.
Mm-hmm. Addendum 1520.
Yes. Store in a dark, cool place. All right, here we go.
Yeah, so...
Nice German Hefeweizen.
They liked that beer so much, they made an amendment to the Constitution of beer.
The Constitution.
Still...
Pours nice.
It's still lame.
Oh, toilet paper?
Yeah, the toilet paper purity law. All right, that's a nice head on that. All head, that any head's good. This one's nice. We got an opaque finish as typical for that style.
Yep.
That is the sole responsibility of yeast and suspension.
It is. It's got a light orange. It's a very light,
good looking
deep
beer.
orange.
Yeah, very orange.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to this. Let's see what we get in the
cheers.
aroma check. Cheers.
Beer 30.
I'm expecting a little spicy phenolic on the nose, a little maybe a little bubble gum. Let's see what we get.
Get some banana.
Banana and bubble gum. I like that.
Banana and bubble gum.
Yeah.
Not too much of a spice. Not too much of the.
No, I don't get it.
side.
The side. That's all right. Not required.
I get a little in the flavor though. Ooh, and banana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the spice is in there.
Yeah. It's very nice.
That's nice.
It's well rounded.
Really good balance between all the banana and bubble gum. None of them are None of them are really, really strong. They're all there, but they're all saying hello.
Yeah.
And
nothing's really punching through.
No, really light finish on that beer. So no weight on my tongue.
It just goes away.
The head disappeared on mine. That's probably my mustache is in the way.
Mustache.
Mustache is no good for beer.
That's because your mustache contains all the foam right now.
It's got all the foam in it. Oh, that's right.
What happened to the head?
I got it. I sucked it back down. Saving that one for later.
That's good.
Easy beer. 50-50, 2-row and wheat.
Yep. 5.4 on the alcohol.
On the Get Her Done scale?
Yep. So about average.
Yeah.
Yep.
The spice character is coming in really nice. I was not expecting as strong.
It looks like it says they've been a brewery since 1040.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a monastery of monasteries.
It had to,
right?
something like that.
Golly.
Yeah. A lot of the like commercial beer scenes, not the large scale production, is not terribly old in terms of beer history. I mean, beer history, we got clear back to like 7,000 BCE.
Yeah, Mesopotamia.
So, yeah, way in the way back machine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the year 1,000.
1,000.
Somebody was making beer.
Woo!
A lot of people making beer. I think most of that beer was probably in the home, but somebody was a little more organized about that.
Yeah.
In Germany.
It could have been, like the monastery or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Monks making their beer.
And why not?
Finally
That's
turned into a real brewery.
I'm down for a religion with a brewery attached.
Now,
that's gonna be good.
Have you ever fasted?
Have I fasted? I've done fast. I've done upwards of a 3-day fast.
I've done a 5-day fast.
5-day.
Yep.
I could probably have done. I felt like I could have gone further, but like we went out. The family wanted to go out, so I'm like, well, fuck it, I'll break this for tacos. But yeah, 3-day, like the first 24 hours was lame. After that, it was fine.
Yeah, and I supplemented beer. I did.
Tradition.
Because it wasn't. It wasn't they have a word for it. I can't remember when you absolutely fast with no intake except water.
And that's what I did.
Yeah, and I did some beer, and then in the morning I'd do some tomato juice. Or else I'd just be sick. I mean, my stomach is...
I felt a little rough. The first 24 hours are kind of the roughest. But after that, man, it was weird because I didn't think about food. I wasn't hungry.
Right.
And all of the extra time not worrying about my next meal and how to prepare it and do all the prep work and set everything up and make it.
Intermittent fasting is good for you.
Yeah. Yep. I try to do that regularly.
So the monasteries, the monks used to fast and then have the beers as their nutritional supplement.
Well, that sounds way better. The last fast I did was for a colonoscopy. And 24 hours with no food, and I broke my fast with a shitty egg salad sandwich from the grocery store deli, and it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible way to break a fast. I should have bought a beer. That would have been better.
Yeah, 7-Eleven.
So get your colonoscopies. Do not break your fast with an egg salad sandwich. Grab a Weinstephaner. Weinstephaner Hefeweizen. So today we're talking about all about the yeast and drinking this beer. This beer is 100% about the yeast. It's doing all the magic for us.
It is.
It's giving us all the flavors, those banana and bubblegum and clove esters and phenols, all come from yeast in what is otherwise a light, easy drinking wheat beer.
Yeah.
Which makes friends easily. It doesn't stand out in a crowd. It kind of
blends in.
Nice. Your Blue Moon, your Shock Top, your some of those like Widmer Hefeweizen. Widmer Hefeweizen, that one was a cleaner hef.
That was a good one.
Yeah, it was a pretty good beer.
A Widmer Hefeweizen, I think, is an American Hefeweizen.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have as much of the esters.
Sure. It's a cleaner,
as the Germans.
Cleaner ferment. If I was going to make that beer, I'd probably use like a Yeast 1010 American.
Wait a minute, are we talking Widmer?
Widmer.
Maybe the Widmer was closer to the German style, and Pyramid
that might have been it. Like
was the American style.
That was 20 plus years ago.
Oh my gosh!
And several blackouts ago.
That was a good beer. Pyramid
did a good job. I miss that one.
Yeah.
Downtown in Seattle.
Yep.
Or in the Pioneer. That was fun.
That was
a good location. You know who else I missed? Hales Ale. You remember them? Hales Ales.
I think they're still.
No, they closed down in
the pandemic.
I can't remember. I just wrote about it the other day. But they closed down. He retired and didn't pass it on. And
okay.
Yeah, but those Hales Ale, that pale ale he did.
Yeah.
The pale American ale.
Yeah.
That was legend. That was the first pale ale in the United States ever brewed.
Wow.
Yeah, English tradition pale ale was the first time it came over.
By Hales?
Hales Ale, yeah. We'll talk about that guy coming up, I'm sure, on a show. I've got a whole piece I did on that one. It was a lot of fun to try to recreate that recipe because I don't want to spoil the show, but it's not in print anymore. Nobody's got a clone recipe of it.
Right.
That beer's been gone forever. Cool little beer.
Can't get a taste of
I
it.
mentioned it because we were talking about old beers in downtown Seattle. And that was one of them.
Very good, very good. I like talking about beer on Beer 30.
Beer on Beer 30. We got another beer today, too, don't we?
We do. I brought another one from Matchless.
Matchless. It's a modern. Where's the Matchless at?
Matchless? I don't know exactly, in Seattle.
Seattle?
Yeah, it's a local. They actually really were one of our beginning customers at Skagit Valley.
Oh, very cool.
And it's a fresh hop saison.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, remember we were talking about that.
Yeah, at the
before.
Fresh Hop Festival you went, or the
right.
Was that
It
you
was
went
the
to
Garden Path?
Yeah,
it was that Garden Path farm ale.
Okay.
So that kind of intrigued me. And talking about the yeast and
Saison's all about the yeast.
Yeah, saison's all about the yeast.
So it just means season. So it's literally whatever's up right now. And that's the beer you make. These little farmhouse yeast. Poof! It's a saison.
It's a saison, and it's used wild yeast. I mean, traditionally.
Yeah.
Catch
whatever's around.
Apple tree.
I think in terms of like the style itself, that saison style, it probably has one of the broadest color ranges, flavor ranges, IBU ranges, ingredient ranges of any beer. It's literally the kitchen sink style. Do whatever you want, and you can damn near throw a farmhouse yeast on it, and poof, it's a saison. Really, that's pretty poor. Y'all can't see this, and that's sad. We're working on that. Nice head. Ooh. Give me some of that beer. Matchless, fresh hopped saison. So this one's a little lighter in color. That's kind of a dark yellow.
Yep. All right,
really.
Let me read the description here.
Do it.
Oh, it's hard. The colors are really off contrast. Looking for something different than other fresh hop IPA. Yeah, we've got your answer. The fresh hop. What the heck does it say?
This is old man eyes.
Can you
Let's
read
see what
that?
I have slightly younger eyes. I only have one of them though.
Yeah.
We got Matchless. Looking for something different than another fresh hop IPA? We've got you covered. This fresh hopped oak foeder aged saison has loads of tart, fruity, and funky notes. That complement the resonating green character of the fresh strata hops from Roy Farms. Here's to something different this fresh hop season.
Very cool.
So I'm getting kind of that funky aroma. It kind of reminds me. It's got a little that horse blanket.
Yeah.
Brett says that Brett kind of character.
Goose.
I mean, I've done Brett saisons, but the Brettanomyces, again, we're all about the yeast. It's kind of like a tart, musty. Like I know those kind of descriptors do not sell you on a lot of beers. But
Right.
shut up. This is delicious.
This is tart. It's tart. The aroma I got from it, I can smell that fresh hop along with that saison yeast. It's like layers.
Well, I'm not kicking that out of bed.
Golly. It's delicious, isn't it?
That is good. That is really good.
Oh,
I'm gonna set that aside for. I'm gonna set that at Matchless. Go get you one.
Matchless
Cool.
Emerald.
That's a cool can.
Emerald what?
Emerald Resonance from Matchless Brewing. Their fresh hop saison. You got this down in Everett.
I got
Where'd
this
you
at
get this at?
Special Brews.
Special Brews. Shout out to
Just
Special
in
Brews.
Linwood.
Special Brews in Linwood.
Right there at 99. And it's Mukilteo Boulevard. It's on 99 though, just south of the intersection.
So easy to get to.
Easy to get to. Yeah, they have a little bar you can go and sample some beers. Just
glass in hand service.
Yep, I think you can
cool.
buy there and then buy drink. They have a chiller, so you can sit down. You can select a bottle and put it in the chiller, and then sit down and maybe have one on tap and butter up for the.
It's like a speed chiller kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yep, spinning water.
But the bottles are stored cold though.
A lot of them.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of ones from Europe that aren't. That are just stored ambient. So
and they have a solution for that. All right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a problem with beers being stored in ambient conditions. I'm not a huge fan of buying beer like at Costco, for instance.
Right.
Because they don't refrigerate it.
Right, ever.
Yeah.
So it's been warm for a long time.
That's them. That's cool.
Sweet.
I guess on a European, a European import beer, like the amount of transit time it goes from brewery to shipyard to ship to shipyard to.
Do you think they
distro?
Deliver in refrigerated cargo containers? I'm sure. Maybe.
I think I don't imagine some of those containers travel well. I mean, I've seen some container ships, and those things are stacked.
Yeah.
I don't know how high they stack those things, but they're designed to be stacked, X number above the deck.
Yep.
And I doubt they've got anybody, tending the compressor.
Refrigeration.
Yeah. I mean, they've got refrigerated.
Well, you got like you got the over-the-road trucker container.
Yeah, but you still got like one or two,
Yeah.
tanks to manage. Not 160.
Well,
friggin' how many of those ships? Those things are huge.
Yeah, it could have an air conditioner in there.
It could, but if it shit the bed, who would know? It's buried.
Yeah.
It's buried 10 deep in a
You're
stack
out
of
of
ships.
luck, buddy.
Yeah,
Out of luck.
All right.
You got warm beer.
So one of the things I dreamt about doing during Beer 30 was kind of a start to shout out to the local beer scene. Today in the shop, was visited by Mr. Mike Noreen from Lopez Island Brewing. And I did bring me a beer. I thought about bringing it in, but I heard you had 2 beers. So I'm like, 3 beers on a Wednesday. But suffice it to say, I talked to Mike Noreen, and he kind of gave me a rundown of what he's got coming up. He's about to brew a brand new stout for the season. It's called the Upright Head Stout. It's going to be 8% ABV. He's got some of his malt going in there. It sounds really, really tasty. That one's going to be probably released in a month. So by the time you're listening to this at home, that's 2 weeks. We're on
the shelf somewhere. Where do you think we can get this?
Well, you should get on the ferry, make a reservation to Lopez Island, get your butt out to Lopez, because everybody's friendly out there. They'll wave to you as you're coming off the boat. In terms of where he's available locally, I don't know that I've seen. I'm sure he is, but I don't recall them.
Okay.
But it's worth the trip. He's got a pretty good system going on. He's got a 10-barrel brew house on Lopez. He's got a brand new little tap room in town. He's been, it's a labor of love. It's a passion project for Mike for sure. Really fantastic dude. We're gonna go out. Actually, we're going out there on Saturday.
Yes.
So by the time you guys are listening to this, that'll have been long gone. But we're going out to Lopez for a little event that's called Brewfest on Lopez. It's a private party put together by the late Christopher O'Brien, who was mad about beer, loved everything about beer and brewing, and took it upon himself to teach a lot of Lopez how to brew. And he would have people, much in the same way Charlie Papazian got his start, in his basement teaching people how to make beer. This was Christopher O'Brien. And annually on the full moon in November, he would host a party, and everybody would bring their beer out and share. So we're going out there on Saturday. It's a little bit of Shangri-La with a lot of beer, and it's going to be good. Mike at Lopez, he'll be out there. He's going to have several different beers. He's got some half-filled kegs he's going to bring to the party.
Right on.
Pretty good. He's got some cans that need to find a home.
Right.
He's also got a rye PA coming up and a triple decoction lager. That decoction lager ought to be pretty good.
Triple decoction lager.
Yeah, it's
We'll
like extra. It's like extra work.
Yeah, totally.
Way extra work. I'm gonna drink some Hefeweizen real quick.
That's what I did. All right, folks. Gonna be wrapping up Beer 30 just like that.
When we come back, we're busting open the top of your fermenter, talk about yeast. So stick around. We'll be right back.
All right.
In the craft beer system, the people are served by two equally important groups: the brewers who make the beer and the bartenders who serve the pints. These are their stories, presented by Northwest Brewers Supply. Oh, the look on Mazda Man's face as his Walla Walla red wine woman walks into the kitchen just after the glass carboy shatters, sending a fresh batch of honey mead to glaze the white kitchen. Who knew one man could feel such fear, yet hold such hope for another trip to Northwest Brewers Supply?
Welcome back, fellow beer lovers, to episode 8 of the Beercraft Beer and Brewing Podcast. Today, we're diving into something that's absolutely essential to every brewer out there: yeast. You know those tiny little creatures that are responsible for turning your sweet, sweet wort into glorious beer?
Yep. We often think about hops, malt, and the water when we're talking about the beer, but the yeast is where the magic really happens. Today we're going to be covering two key topics about yeast. First, we'll talk about ale versus lager yeast, and then we'll deep dive into the understanding of your yeast cycle, the life cycle of your yeast, and what it's actually doing in your beer.
You know, there's an old saying, Andrew, like brewers make wort, yeast make beer.
Oh, there we go.
Like, this is the real heavy-hitting stuff there.
Yeast make the beer, all right. So let's get started with the basics. Ales versus lager yeast. It might sound simple, but there are two main types of yeast that are responsible for some pretty big differences in the final beer.
So let's break it down. Ale yeast, it's generally Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This strain gives us those classic ales: pale ales, IPAs, stouts, porters, brown ales, etc., etc. You name it. Ale yeast works best at warmer temperatures between 60 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and that higher temperature means it can create more fruity and sometimes spicy esters. Those are the flavors that might remind you of bananas, cloves, bubblegum, but in most ales probably like a fruity, generalized nondescript fruit flavor.
Yep, some of those flavors that we tasted at Beer 30 in the Hefeweizen, really, really good. That's why ales tend to have more of the complex aromatic notes. Meanwhile, the lager yeast, Saccharomyces pastorianus, is
your Latin lesson for the day.
Pastorianus is a whole different beast. Lager yeast like it cool, typically fermenting at temperatures between 40 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The colder conditions mean for a slower temperature, slower fermentation, and this creates a more cleaner flavor profile. So the less of those fruity esters, and the focus is more on the malt, focus is more on the hops. That's why lagers have that crisp, smooth quality that makes them refreshing and just drinkable.
That's also why lagers take longer to ferment and condition. We can kind of see this in practice. A warmer ferment doesn't take as long. In fact, if you're just north of the upper end range of your yeast, it takes less time. Well, at slower temperatures, lager yeast can do the job, but they're just going to take longer. So those cooler temperatures mean everything moves just a little slower. A lagering process of conditioning your beer at colder temperatures gives lager its characteristic smoothness, and this is a hobby that's been daily trying to teach us patience. Patience.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. It's not always easy for homebrewers.
Oh, I've been a shitty student on
to
that.
Nail patience. And it's even harder to nail the temperature control and wait it out. But the results are worth it. And whether you're brewing a bold, fruity ale or a crisp, clean lager, choosing that right yeast and understanding its needs is crucial. I had the opportunity to use an amazing yeast while I was in Mexico.
Who would you use?
Well, I might not say this right. You know me. My vocabulary is horrible. I call it the Kveik.
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 I've heard it all.
Who knows? But now here is an ale. It's an ale yeast, and it can ferment at higher temperatures.
That's cool you got a hold of that. I think when you were active, that was kind of a brand new yeast on the scene.
Yep.
Traditionally, it's a funeral beer, which means if you were in Scandinavia and you died on a Monday, they could have beer on Wednesday for the wake.
Yeah.
So it's very, very fast.
Right. It ferments out really quick, and that's because it ferments at a little bit of a higher temperature.
It kind of breaks all the rules.
It does.
There are some strains that are farmhousey, like your saisons, but there's also some clean fermenting ones.
Yes, very clean.
Traditionally, they would have. It's cool. They have this wooden carved wreath. It looks like interlocking wooden rings, and on brew day they'd cool it off and they'd just grab that thing off a hook and throw it in the fermenter, and that would inoculate the whole show. Because the yeast don't care about things like cell count or temperature or any speed you're used to. They just get it done.
They just go.
And they fish that hook out and that wreath out, and they'd hang it back on a hook and wait for the next guy.
Wow, nice. So I liked it because my brewery in Mexico was small. It was a microbrewery.
Sure.
And I had two temperature controlled fermenting vessels, and I had one that I just set my fermenter on in the brewery, and I use Covert yeast in that one every time.
Kind of perfect for your location.
Yep.
It's hot down there.
Yeah, no, it's not too hot. I would say it's 72 and sunny all the time.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to get up to 80, you're going to get up to 90 in the hot days, and down
That puts you
40,
way outside most yeast range.
But but in the normal area, 72 is average. So being able to ferment at 76, 78 degrees was amazing for me, because it opened up another beer on my tap list that I didn't have to wait for my fermenters to come. So.
I just brewed the Harvest Lager. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. I threw a Covert yeast on that, so we're going to take that one out to Lopez.
Nice,
because it was done in a week, in under a week really. I put it in secondary for cold crash for a couple days, and I kegged it yesterday.
Wow.
So reminds me, I have to set an alarm to turn that beer down tomorrow.
Right.
So there is another important difference, folks, between the two types of yeast and how they ferment. Ale yeast is known as a top fermenting yeast, and this just means that during fermentation, the ale yeast tend to rise to the top of the fermenter and sort of hang out there, and they're going to form this thick, foamy, it's called a Krausen, which is your $10 word for the day, German for this yeast cake. You'll often hear ale fermentation referred to as top fermenters. This activity allowed brewers to even skim some of that foam off and add it to another batch a couple of days later in a process called top cropping. And there's a couple of notable English breweries that would actually rig up a system that had a blow off, so extra foam would go into, I think it's called a grant, and they would collect it there in a sterile environment, and they would use that as a direct inoculation for the next batch. But it's kind of cool.
Exactly. Well, and that's different from lager yeast, which is known as a bottom fermenting yeast. Lager yeast tends to settle at the bottom of the fermenter, and it kind of goes slower because it's down at the bottom. It's slow, and the temperature is slower, but that's what's contributing to that clean and crisp flavor.
Yeah,
profile.
I think the fact that they don't have to settle through the whole column of beer to get out of the way when they're done generally is going to lead you to sort of a clearer output, clearer beer.
Yeah, nice.
Interesting. That bottom fermenting yeast, when it was discovered or invented / discovered, some of the brewers in Cologne, man, they referred to it as bottom yeast, and I think they kind of put a little stink on that. Like they were very anti bottom yeast, and that gave rise to the invention of Kolsch, which we're going to talk about in another show.
Yeah. We already talked about Kolsch a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a whole segment we're going to do.
That's good.
So the difference between top and bottom fermentation doesn't just affect where yeast are in your fermenter. It impacts the flavor, the characteristics you get in your final beer. Top fermenting ale yeast produces esters and phenols. These are little flavor compounds. These are responsible for fruity and spicy flavors.
Yeah. So let's break that down. Let's break it down a bit more. And the esters. So the esters are responsible for the fruity aromas. And they're created during the fermentation by ale yeast. And one of the most well-known esters found in Hefeweizens, which often have that banana-like flavor that we smelled and tasted today. And esters can also give off flavor of pear, apple, or even tropical fruits, depending on the yeast strain and the fermentation conditions.
That's esters. Phenols, on the other hand, are compounds that give a spicy, herbal, or sometimes even smoky flavors. Many saisons, like the one we drank today, have a distinctive sort of like peppery or clove-like spice that comes from phenols produced during fermentation. These flavors can range from clove, black pepper, to even somewhat medicinal.
Yeah, you don't want too much.
Not too much of that. That could be a flaw. Yeah. Any of these really in large quantities can be a flaw. Yeah. That banana ester that we love so much in Hefeweizen, if you put that in an IPA, is bad.
Yeah.
Banana flavored IPAs are not a thing, thankfully.
Right. And the production of esters and phenols is influenced by the fermentation temperature.
The temperature, yeah.
The yeast strain.
Health of the yeast can do that.
Yeah,
so they get stressed out.
Oxygen levels. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And wort composition, Hefeweizens have their distinct malt bill and their yeast to get those different esters, banana and clove combination. And that's a perfect example of the yeast creating both of those esters at once. The esters of banana and the phenolic spicy, and it does it in a way that defines that style.
While we're on the topic, I think we were talking about lager yeast. I think it's appropriate to kind of go in a little bit of the history of lager yeast because it's kind of fascinating. Lager yeast, or Saccharomyces pastorianus, it's a hybrid of it. Now this goes back, it's kind of a hybrid yeast, and it's believed to originate be a cross between a warm tolerant ale yeast and a cold tolerant wild yeast species, Saccharomyces eubayanus, and this cross likely happened several hundred years ago in those cool lagering caves of Bavaria. Brewers were storing their beer at cold temperatures during the warmer weather.
Yep.
They would just make a ton of it, store it cold, and stash it away so it was available to drink.
Right.
This is pre-refrigeration.
So they inoculate theirs, and then they go and cold store this.
Right,
in
that's
barrels.
And that was sort of where this kind of like hybridization happened. It was kind of a perfect storm of events that led to this hybrid yeast that was tolerant to cold temperatures and could handle complex malt sugars. And that was sort of a new thing. And of course, this is all like pre-invention of microscopes didn't even get invented until like the late 1590. Like some watchmaker built one, and like he maybe got as much as 9x magnification. So not even enough to do it. But they noticed there was still like yeast, and there's some residue. What can we do with this? Does it do anything? And they brewed a beer, and it made beer, and then they tried it colder and colder and colder, and boom, they can make this bottom fermenting yeast. It's weird. It shows up on the bottom, and it can handle cold temperatures, which really fascinating stuff. We didn't even fully understand what was going on for another 100 years before Pasteur figures out germ theory in 1590, I think, and they've got a microscope that can see this stuff and see what's going on. Crazy town. So yeah, we're back in the 1600s, and again, I mentioned we're refrigeration. You can almost thank breweries for your modern refrigerator. Prior to that, we've got cold caves to store this beer, and it was the brewing industry that was leading the research into the first commercial refrigeration that didn't require an ice block. They call a refrigerator an ice box occasionally because they would literally carve out a a foot of ice, and you would stash that in the box, and it would keep everything cold. But it was the brewing temperature, the brewing industry, that was responsible for funding that research. So,
let me interject here.
Go for it.
I just looked it up. I had to. So Louis Pasteur was he did his research in the 1880s. So that's when
1600 to 1880, we got 200
years without knowing.
200 years of loggers without even knowing,
what's going on. Yeah, and then he came on board and figured it all out. Wow.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So right now, you can go to your fridge, you can grab a cold one, and you can raise a glass to brewers, because the invention of the refrigerator could have been delayed, and we could still be using blocks of ice today.
Well, I know. Well, that's
so three cheers for beer, making the world a better place, one pint at a time.
Right. Today the lagers are tended to be associated with regions like Germany or Czech Republic, where they had the ideal conditions for the cold storage, and like you say, in the ice caves where they did the fermentation and the storage. And they pretty much perfected, like we're talking about, they perfected that lagering process that we know today. And we are still reaping the benefits of that. 200 years of not even knowing, and we use that today.
Yeah, it's great. So, summing up, got ale yeast are top fermenting, prefers warmer temperatures, giving us complex fruity flavors. Lager yeast, on the other hand, they're bottom fermenting, work best at colder temperatures, producing clean, crisp beers. Understand the difference, helps you as a brewer decide what kind of beer you want to make, how to create the best possible conditions for the yeast to thrive.
And don't forget, whether you're brewing an ale or a lager, the key is giving your yeast what they need. Temperature control, oxygen at the right time, and the patience are all crucial. If you do that, those tiny little yeast cells will reward you with some pretty amazing beer. Yum.
So before we move on, let me ask you this. Do you really know what's happening inside your fermenter? In segment 2, we're going to unravel the yeast life cycle. From the moment they hit your sweet, sweet wort to the final drop of alcohol.
I've had a couple different fermenters.
We're going to take an inside look at the yeast party and what makes your beer taste amazing, and understand what your yeast is actually doing in your beer. Taking a closer look at the... We're going to take a closer look at the yeast life cycle, why it matters to your final brew.
Yeah. You know what? I told you, I said I had a couple different types of fermenters. I've had the traditional stainless steel and the glass carboys. And watching this life cycle through the glass carboy is amazing. You can never see it you see the airlock coming on the stainless. But having a glass carboy and watching the yeast go and
it's
turn.
It's a turbulent.
Woo, it's cool.
There's a lot of activity going on. Man, they make a ton of gas.
I was always digging it.
They're moving stuff around.
All right, so
come back. We're gonna deep dive on segment 2.
We'll be right back here on the Beer Craft.
10 Reasons to Homebrew by Northwest Brewer Supply. Part 2.
Number 7. Making beer is a lot like having kids. Kids who don't talk back, beg for money, and beer will gladly get you wasted. Number 6. Unlimited beer supply for the apocalypse, just in case. Number 5. Finally, a legitimate reason to buy giant vats and tubes without ending up on a government watch list. Number 4. Hops are a plant, so technically, it's gardening.
Straight from the home office in Burlington, it's another Top 10 with Northwest Brewer Supply.
So yeast, they're not just working quietly in the background. They've got a whole life cycle that impacts your beer at every stage. A yeast life cycle can be broken down into 4 main phases. We got the lag period, growth phase, fermentation phase, and sedimentation phase. Interestingly, side note, your wort is legally beer as soon as you pitch the yeast.
Ooh.
So it's very fast to make beer. It's like damn near instant beer, just add water.
Right.
Right?
Well, starting on your brew day, that lag period, the yeast are getting used to the new environment. Once you pitch it, once you create beer, and pitch them yeast in. They go into the first phase, the lag phase. And they're busy taking up oxygen and eating the nutrients, and then there is in the some of the wort early sugars. Yeah, they're busy because they're busy taking in oxygen and nutrients to build up their strength. The lag phase is really important because it's where the yeast prepare for their growth. And if your yeast aren't healthy, you're not going to get a good fermentation during the stage. During the lag phase, the yeast also absorb essential minerals. They're getting ready to work ahead. Giving them adequate oxygen during the phase is critical, and it allows the yeast to build a strong cell wall that can withstand the stress of fermentation. And, well, it also allows for the growth of the new healthy yeast.
That yeast sounds pretty busy during the lag phase. Bad marketing department for the lag phase. So after the lag phase, we quickly go into the growth phase, also known as the party phase. This is where yeast are actively multiplying, resulting in a rapid increase in total cell count during the phase. Yeast are producing also, during this time, acetaldehyde, which can give a sort of a shitty green apple flavor.
We talked about that before.
If not, this is where they make it, and if it's not properly reduced,
it's a flaw.
You're going to taste it. At this stage, you're not going to see any airlock activity, but don't panic. The party's just getting started. Once all the oxygen is consumed, the stage is over, and the real fun begins.
Oh, yeah. So after that, we move into the fermentation phase. And at this point, the yeast are no longer multiplying. Instead, they're busy consuming sugar, producing alcohol and CO2. Once all the sugar is gone, it doesn't mean that they're done. They're still cleaning up after themselves. It usually takes, what is a good fermentation period? 3 days?
Minimum 2 weeks.
Well, I'm talking about the fermentation phase.
The fermentation phase. Fermentation, like sugar conversion, is like 3 to 5 days.
Yeah, it's fast
and
at
then,
3, and then
it
slowly kind of ramps down. Yeah, this is the crucial phase because the yeast are metabolizing some of that byproduct that can cause off flavors like diacetyl, which has that buttery movie theater popcorn taste.
Ugh, nasty stuff.
Oh yeah, caramely smell. You don't want those in your beer at all. Remember all the acetaldehyde that was made during that growth phase? Well, during this time, the yeast are also hard at work to reduce that acetaldehyde to improve the overall flavor profile. And that's giving the yeast enough time in this phase to ensure a cleaner, better tasting beer. Remember, relax, don't worry, and have a home brew.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let them take their time.
Yeah.
I think this is where a lot of brew houses maybe like rushing to production, rushing to packaging. Being impatient in this hobby.
Yep.
Or if
you
that's your
just
job, even
see it done, you think it's finished and proceeding.
Yeah. So when I see a lot of diacetyl or acetaldehyde, I'm like, man, I gotta send those bad boys back.
Yep.
So we've gone through
The lag.
the lag phase, the growth phase,
Party phase.
the
Fermentation phase.
fermentation phase, and now we're finally onto the sedimentation phase. The yeast have done their job, and they're starting to settle down. They start forming sediment at the bottom of your fermenter. A process is called flocculation. It is fancy talk for yeast ability to kind of clump together, and they become, they kind of clump together for, safety, right? Safety in numbers kind of thing. Though they clump together, they become heavier, and they sink to the bottom of your fermenter. And so different yeasts are going to flocculate better than others. For instance, highly flocculent strains might clear well without filtration. However, lower flocculating yeast isn't by any means inferior. In fact, that quality is important for styles like the Hefeweizen we had today. So you want yeast in suspension to give that cloudy appearance. If you're brewing a lager, this is when you'd start that flocculation process during the conditioning phase. That beer at colder temperatures is going to let everything mellow out and improve the flavor profile of your beer. So it's important to be patient here and give your beer the time it needs to mature and reach its full potential. This stage is kind of like your Sunday pot roast. Your Sunday supper tastes really, really good, but the leftovers your mom sent home with you that you got to take to work on Monday were better.
Yeah.
And everything just comes, all those flavors come together.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Another lessons in patience.
Brought to you by Beer.
Yeah. So understanding these phases helps you, as a brewer, know what to expect and know your yeast needs. For example, the oxygen is critical during the lag phase, but after that, you want to minimize any exposure to oxygen. Temperature control is also key, keeping that yeast in that their perfect temperature range keeps them happy, and they'll ensure that a healthy fermentation happens, and then you get the flavors that you're aiming for.
So remember, your yeast, they're more than just an ingredient. They are a living, breathing microorganism. They need the right conditions to make great beer. So if you treat them well, so we've talked about Hefeweizen strains, we've talked about Saison strains, Kvike strains. Andrew, what are your favorite strains? Like
My
Desert
favorite
Island
strain
top 5.
is the 1048 from Yeast. Is it
1084 maybe?
1084?
Irish Tail?
Irish Ale.
That's a good strain.
Yeah, Irish Ale yeast. That's one of my favorites. That's what I use for my stouts and my reds.
Don't know why you wouldn't.
Yeah, why not? It's good. I mean, I made my stout with a 1056 from Yeast, and that's going to be your average ale yeast. And it is different. Same exact recipe, same exact ingredients, just a different yeast strain. And you can tell that. You can tell that yeast flavor profile in there, which makes the stout beer, in my opinion, a little bit better. I believe so. It gives a little bit of a sweet, a little more fruity esters in that yeast, which
does really well in dark
complements.
wort.
Yeah, which complements the malt bill.
Regularly in the brew house, I'll do a 10-gallon batch, but I will split the fermenters, like 2 5-gallon fermenters.
Right.
And I'll throw different yeasts on that.
I love that.
That always produces... It produces 2 wildly different beers. One change will completely change up your beer profile.
Right.
You're going to add mileage to your kegerator.
Yep, that's a perfect thing for you to have at your shop too.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
pretty
explain.
rare that I do a 10-gallon batch of the same yeast, and there'd have to be like I've done it for, say, like a Scotch ale when I want a lot of it,
right?
Or a Oktoberfest. I usually want a lot
when
of
you know
too,
what you're making, and then
other stout friendly ones I've used 1056. I've used 1275. The Thames Valley strain is fantastic in porters and stouts. Any of your English ale strains will do the job on that one. One of my current favorites of all time right now is the Yeast 2565 Kolsch strain. I'm a big fan of Kolsch.
Love Kolsch.
Yeah, I've been kind of like deep diving on them for a while, really enjoying them every time I go someplace that has one. But that 2565 is such a delicious strain.
I think I used maybe a Yeast Kolsch strain?
Yeah, that's that's the
one you're talking about. White Labs.
White Labs, I have not tried their Kolsch strain.
Okay,
I've had it before.
Sure.
I've not tried to brew with it.
Yeah.
It's a little. I think the White Labs one's a little bit cleaner on the Colt for kind of that Kolsch, like that little sweet edge.
Yep.
That the 2565 gives. I think it's missing in 107s, K97s, White Labs, even the Kolsch 2 strain, 2575 from Yeast, is a little bit cleaner. And I get why they're doing it. It's kind of cool. That style was invented to kind of compete with the brand new blonde, bottom fermented Czech, beers that were kind of taking over everywhere. So they kind of invented that style to compete. But I love that 2565. I've done some fun stuff. Some of my cream ale recipes with like little rice, little corn, with the 2565. Shut the front door. Like, folks, give me a diving board. I'm head first.
Oh, right on.
It's good beer.
So let's talk about the types of yeast that the home brewer can get. There's a couple different types, right?
You can kind of break it down into
There's
like
a smack pack.
like two formats. You got liquid strains and dry
yeast.
strains.
Yeah.
Historically, in the homebrew industry, dry yeast they've always been sort of like limited in flavor options.
Profiles, yep.
Because not every yeast strain can survive the desiccation or freeze drying process.
Right. And I had a like a snooty attitude about dry yeast when I started homebrewing.
Yeah,
and
in the 70s and 80s there was
certainly learned that Safe Ale 04 and 05 were definitely
they're kicking
really
ass.
good.
The technology has improved. There was sort of a kick, like a pushback against some of the dry yeast,
Yeah.
and there were some reasons. Some manufacturers made some pretty lackluster
Right.
versions of it that maybe didn't have the viability that a liquid yeast. So liquid yeast, conversely, we generally have more flavor options available to us because we can find it in the wild. We can grow it up in isolation. We can package it and produce it and send it all over the place. So we have a lot of flavor diversity in a liquid culture. But a liquid culture it's dying from day one.
Yep.
Right?
So it's got to be fresh.
We lose some. Yeah, freshness
fresh.
is a major thing. The yeast are dying, which means their cell counts 100. We start with 100 billion cells per pack, and we're losing them over time. And if you're using something like a pitch rate calculator for your beers, it's going to kind of spell it out like you need
This much,
like 325 billion cells for this high ABV beer, and so that might be, that might be 3 or 4 packs of yeast or a
be.
big starter.
Right.
Which we're going to do a show on starters, I think.
and it takes a starter to use certain yeasts. So we could start with like a Y yeast as a smack pack, and that's what 100 billion cells in there. Once you activate it, once you activate it, it has a little sugar pack inside the foil pouch, and you go to brew day and you smack that on the ground and it breaks that and it starts puffing up.
It's still pretty unique in the industry, that smack pack technology.
And then you pitch, and it creates more cells for you, and it gets the cells going.
It's really just a viability test. I try to explain it as it's a cup of coffee for yeast. We take them out of the refrigerator, they're dormant, they're sleepy. We take them and bring them to a warm environment. They start waking up, and we've got the continental breakfast for them. It's not a ton of sugar, it's not a ton of nutrient, but it's enough to sort of get them going.
Activated.
What it does for you as a brewer, it gives you a viability test. That pack swells up, and that tells you that your yeasts are alive and kicking because you're very human. You're having this paranoia moment. You don't want to fuck things up. You don't know if this yeast is any good,
right?
And so it gives you this kind of cool little test you can do, bench test.
Affirmation
that your yeast is alive.
Yeah, cool.
It's not a ton of stuff
because you can't tell that with your powdered yeast.
Your powdered yeast or any of your other liquid manufacturers that just do open the pack and pour.
Right. So with White Labs, we'll say it's a certain type of packaging. It comes, it's very compact, and it's stored in a little vial.
They've actually gotten away from the vial.
Really?
Yeah, the vial got costly, so they have now they call it their pure pitch technology. So they grow up the entire batch of yeast in a big bag, and now they can make the little bags by heat sealing. Basically pressing through the big bag.
Right.
It's kind of cool thing they're doing. You don't have a viability test or anything like that.
And you need to make a starter with that one.
Depending on they have pure pitch, 100 billion cells, cell count, so ready to rock and roll for most of your beers.
Now, how do you warm that up?
You just leave it on that. Just let it come to ambient temperature.
Put it in your pants.
I like to. I like to recommend, if you got a drafty old house like mine, stick them on top of the refrigerator.
Yeah,
even in a drafty kitchen, that spot's warmer because that condenser is actually, it's robbing heat from everything on the inside and it's got to go somewhere. So it gets kicked out of the backside of your refrigerator. So that space is a little bit warmer, even with an old drafty house like mine.
Good spot.
So room temp, just let them kind of warm up.
Yeah.
And that's okay for most of your beers. There's a couple other manufacturers. Imperial Organics, they came out a couple years ago. They are doing a 200 billion cell count pack.
Oh.
If you were to look at,
So that's really effective count for a 10-gallon batch, correct?
Well, they've got it. It's a direct inoculation for a 5-gallon batch. So one of the things that gets talked about in your cell count strategy is it's really gravity dependent. Your Y yeast or your 100 billion cell size pack size, that's enough for direct inoculation for gravities up to like 1040. So really, when you're 1040 to 1060, you're kind of in 2-pack territory, even with 1 pack. So,
right, and because if you don't pitch enough, the lag time is too long.
The lag time can be longer.
Yeah.
You're creating extra stresses for yeast, which can produce off flavors.
Yes.
You have incomplete attenuation, or they don't convert all the sugars that you want. So those are sort of the pitfalls of under pitching your yeast. So even Y yeast is recommending 2 packs for 2 packs north of 1060.
Right. All right. What does it take to overpitch?
So over pitching, there is a upper end threshold, but I joke with people that this one's kind of economically avoidable because you would never have that many open packs of yeast by an open fermenter. Like you wouldn't just buy that. You wouldn't just have that
10
many
packs. Yeah. Right.
At over pitching, you can run the risk as they run out of oxygen rapidly. They haven't had enough time the yeast haven't had enough time to take up nutrition for the work ahead, and they can get kind of lazy.
Lazy and weak.
So you'll see slightly lower attenuation rates because it just kind of got lazy. But if you've got even if you're pitching onto a yeast cake of a previous batch of beer, that's twice as much as you started with or better. You're still
right.
okay.
So if I take my whole yeast cake from my 5-gallon bucket, and let's say I just transfer my beer off, I can put my brew that I brewed that day right in there, right?
If it's cooled, and if you're going sort of like
sanitary?
if it's got a vector, it's a risk factor.
Yeah.
But so many things are. If you're going from a lighter to darker beer, and lighter hopping to a hoppier beer on the second round, you'd kind of be okay on that front. There's some protocols for yeast washing that also have they're kind of you're trying to clean up the yeast and get the good stuff, but those are also vectors for disease as well.
Right. There's a lot to consider when trying to harvest your own yeast and propagate your own yeast.
A cool trick if you want like a perpetual yeast kind of thing is buy a pack, do a starter, use half of it and save half of it.
Yep.
Next time you want to brew, make another starter, brew half and save half. Yep. And you can kind of keep a nice clean ferment or at least clean yeast bank.
Right.
Low air. Yeast can mutate, right? It's biology, so there's going to be every cell division, increases the what the heck is that going on kind of moment. But keeping it clean like that will produce lower amounts for that.
Yeah. All right. That's going to about wrap up segment 2 for us, folks. We're going to take a short break before we end the show and give our sponsor some love, Northwest Brewer Supply. We appreciate them and all the knowledge that they share. Ben, thank you very much. Another great episode.
Cheers, Andrew.
We'll be right back.
In the homebrewing system, one question is asked more than any other. In Burlington, the dedicated brewers who answer this question are members of an elite squad known as the Special Brewers Unit. These are their stories.
Mazda Man, why homebrew your own beer? Homebrew for the finest, most personalized beer. Control every ingredient and flavor. It's easy and satisfying with Northwest Brewer Supply.
Brew smart, brew safe, brew your best with Northwest Brewer Supply.
All right. So that's it for today's episode, folks. We hope you found this deep dive into yeast helpful, whether you're brewing an ale or a lager, or just trying to be better understanding of your yeast. Remember that a little care goes a long way.
As always, if you have questions or want to share your latest brew with us, hit us up on our social media. We've got Facebook, all that stuff. Drop us a message on the website at nwbrewers.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget to tune in next week when we talk about the importance of water, chemistry, and brewing. Trust us, it's more exciting than it sounds. I know water is like, it's abundant.
Water chemistry is like Ambien.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Cheaper, too.
I'm no chemist, but hey, we're looking to
got
get
a surprise for you folks.
Here.
We're going to have our very first episode, our very first guest here on the show. I'm going to try to wrangle up Mr. Bob Rock. We mentioned him on the show a few times. Bob Rock is a professor emeritus at that's a joke professor emeritus at Cargill Craft Brewing Academy. We're wrangle him into the studio here.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about all the water chemistry you can handle. So until next time, keep brewing, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep drinking great beer.
Thanks for listening
to the Beer Craft.